This is Land of Havilah. Isaiah 16 is the rest of the prophecy that a foreign invasion is coming to Moab. Verse 1. Send the lambs for the ruler of the land from Selah to the wilderness, to the mountain of the daughter of Zion. For it'll be that as wandering birds, as a scattered nest, so will the daughters of Moab be at the fords of the Arnon. Comment Selah in verse 1 means rock in Hebrew. It's an uncertain location, but probably somewhere in Moab. The verse says, Send the lambs for the ruler of the land, from Selah to the wilderness to the mountain of the daughter of Zion. The meaning is probably to the effect that the king of Moab should send lambs for sacrifice to Jerusalem. He should make an appeal to Yahweh, the God of Israel, in other words. But probably the king of Moab didn't take that advice, since historically the Moabites worshiped Baal Peor and Chemosh, Numbers 21:29 and 25:1-3. Then in verse 2, the daughters of Moab, which is the women of Moab, will flee over the Arnon River, which was their northern border. The women of the land will be as vulnerable as baby birds scattered from the nest, quote, For it'll be that as wandering birds, as a scattered nest, so will the daughters of Moab be at the fords of the Arnon. Verse 3. Give counsel, execute justice, make your shade like the night in the middle of the noonday, hide the outcast, don't betray the fugitive. Let my outcast dwell with you. As for Moab, be a hiding place for him from the face of the destroyer. For the extortionist is brought to nothing. Destruction ceases. The oppressors are consumed out of the land. Comment verses 3 and 4 we just read are God's advice to Moab. If we can read into it a little bit, the Assyrian armies will be advancing through the neighboring countries. We know that was true from biblical and secular history. Therefore, refugees from those countries will be fleeing to Moab, trying to stay one step ahead of the Assyrians. God's counsel for Moab is to do the right thing and shelter them, to execute justice for them in verse 3, to hide them as in the shade of the night in the middle of the day, to hide the outcasts, and not to betray the fugitives. Let them dwell with you in verse 4. Don't extort them in verse 4, meaning don't confiscate what they have in exchange for shelter. For whoever extorts them will be brought to nothing. Those who oppress them will be consumed out of the land. God will be angry if that's what they do. Now, a one-verse declaration that the God of Israel will judge. Verse 5. A throne will be established in loving kindness. One will sit on it in truth in the tent of David, judging, seeking justice, and swift to do righteousness. Comment in verse 5, the tent of David is exactly what it says. It's the tent David constructed to house the ark, 2 Samuel 6:17. Since God was present with the ark, it was a tent for God, Exodus 25:22. In verse 5, a throne will be established in that tent. Someone will sit on that throne in loving kindness, judging, seeking justice, and swift to do righteousness. Anyone sitting on that throne in that tent would have to be God. So it's another snippet of the millennium that Christ will be present in Zion, which is where the tent was. His dwelling place in Zion will have its historical roots in the tent of David. Therefore, since he'll judge, the Moabites should do the right thing, appeal to Yahweh, and shelter refugees is the point. But coming up, that won't happen. Verse 6. We have heard of the pride of Moab, that he's very proud, even of his arrogance, his pride, and his wrath. His boastings are nothing. Therefore Moab will wail for Moab. Comment, the Assyrian invasion is coming, and the Moabites will wail for themselves. Coming up, they're still wailing for themselves, and God will lament for them also. The locations are all in Moab. Still in verse 7. Everyone will wail, you'll mourn for the raisin cakes of Kir Hareseth, utterly stricken. For the fields of Heshbon languish with the vine of Sibmah. The lords of the nations have broken down its choice branches, which reached even to Jazer, which wandered into the wilderness. Its shoots were spread abroad. They passed over the sea. Therefore I will weep with the weeping of Jazer for the vine of Sibmah. I'll water you with my tears, Heshbon and Eleah. For on your summer fruits and on your harvest the battle shout has fallen. Comment in verses 7 and 9, God visualizes Moab as a fruitful place that will be stricken in verse 7, that will languish and be broken down in verse 8, and over which he'll weep in verse 9. God will water the land with his tears. In verse 9, the battle shout has fallen, which means war is coming. Verse 10. Gladness is taken away and joy out of the fruitful field, and in the vineyards there'll be no singing, neither joyful noise. Nobody will tread out wine in the presses. I've made the shouting stop. Comment, there'll be an interruption in agriculture because of war. Nobody will tread out the wine presses because God has made all that activity stop. Now more lamenting for Moab on God's part, verse 11. Therefore my heart sounds like a harp for Moab, and my inward parts for Kir-Heres. It'll happen that when Moab presents himself, when he wearies himself on the high place and comes to his sanctuary to pray, that he'll not prevail. Comment in verse 12, the Moabites will weary themselves praying to their gods on tops of their high places, but they will not prevail. Their prayers will be to no effect. Verse 13. This is the word that Yahweh spoke concerning Moab in time past. But now Yahweh has spoken, saying, within 3 years, as a worker bound by contract would count them, the glory of Moab shall be brought into contempt with all his great multitude, and the remnant will be very small and feeble. Comment, Isaiah says in verse 13 that this isn't a new prophecy. It was spoken in time past. But now in verse 14, Yahweh has spoken again concerning this prophecy and says it will come to pass within 3 years. Moab will be brought to contempt. The surviving remnant of people in the land will be small and feeble. As we commented at the beginning of this prophecy, the Assyrians invaded and conquered Moab during Isaiah's lifetime between 734 and 732 BC. Isaiah 17 is next.